The US State Department says it plans to hold talks with French officials in the coming days in an effort to defuse a diplomatic row after Australia scrapped a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy French conventionally powered submarines. The head of US Central Command has acknowledged one of the last American operations in Afghanistan killed 10 civilians, 7 of them children. He called the attack a tragic mistake. Security has been tightened ahead of a right-wing rally taking place in Washington. Police chiefs say there had been some threats of violence before the demonstration in support of people arrested during the January the 6th riot. Algeria's former president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, has died at the age of 84 after a long illness. He played a leading role in Algeria's War of Independence in the 1960s and was ousted from power during street protests in 2019.
Stunning admission from the Pentagon that a drone strike in Kabul during those chaotic evacuations from Afghanistan hit civilians instead of ISIS-K members. ABC's White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks is on the North Lawn with that story and the apology. Good morning, Mary Alice.
Yeah, good morning, Stephanie. It's been 3 weeks, but the Pentagon is now unequivocally apologizing for that missile strike in Kabul that left 10 dead, including children. Pentagon officials now calling a U.S. missile strike in Kabul a terrible mistake, concluding it left 7 innocent children and 3 innocent adults dead. Identifying the driver of the car targeted as Zamari Ahmadi, an aid worker who worked for a U.S.-based group. Seen in this surveillance video, officials now acknowledge loading water canisters into the car, not explosives.
It was a mistake, and I offer my sincere apology.
Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin offering his condolences to the family, writing, "We know now that there was no connection between Mr. Ahmadi and ISIS-Khorasan, and that his activities on that day were completely harmless." It was just 3 days after a suicide bomber killed 13 American service members and some 170 Afghans at the Kabul airport. Fears and anxiety around the final withdrawal of U.S. troops sky high. And the Pentagon said it had dozens of intelligence reports indicating another imminent attack. So U.S. drones tracking a white car for hours they thought had linked up with ISIS-K, watching the driver load the vehicle, launching that Hellfire missile. In the days after, military officials defending the move.
I know it's a righteous strike.
A New York Times investigation first calling the strike into question.
There were all sorts of factors that went into the poor decision to pull the trigger on this target without properly identifying the person in the car and in the surrounding area.
And there are questions now of accountability. The military says it will finish a complete investigation into what went wrong. But this was obviously an intelligence failure after a long line of major intelligence issues out of Afghanistan this summer. Whit.
Really an awful scene there as the country moved out of that Afghanistan after 2 decades of war. Mary Alice, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Now to the humanitarian crisis.
The contenders in the leadership race for Japan's main ruling Liberal Democratic Party have laid out their policies in a debate 1 day after the official campaigning began. The winner is virtually assured to become the next prime minister. The 4 contenders are Regulatory Reform Minister Kono Taro, former LDP Policy Research Council Chairperson Kishida Fumio, former Internal Affairs and Communications Minister Takaichi Sanai, and LDP Executive Acting Secretary General Noda Seiko. The debate on Saturday covered various issues, from measures against the pandemic, the economy, and energy policies. Here's what they had to say on policies relating to China.
It is necessary that the international community stand up to China. The Japan-China relationship is not only about security, but also economics and human exchanges. That's why we must engage in tough diplomacy. It is important for the 2 leaders to hold summit meetings on a regular basis and communicate with each other.
Countries that share universal values with Japan must make sure that China understands how it should act as a major power. Related countries should make efforts so that the Taiwan issue can be resolved peacefully. If any contingency occurs, I will deal with it in accordance with the provisions of the legislation for peace and security.
We need to be prepared, assuming there is a high possibility of contingencies involving Taiwan. Japan is limited in what it can do, especially in the military field. In reality, one option is for the country to possess the effective deterrence and response capabilities and to complement it with the Japan-US alliance.
The key is whether Japan will take a realistic approach amid the tensions between the US and China. Japan has pledged not to engage in war under its pacifist constitution. It's time for the country's top leader to carry out solid diplomacy.
The LDP will elect its new president on September 29th. The government plans to hold a session of the Diet the following week to choose the next prime minister. The Taliban have replaced the sign at the entrance of the Women's Ministry with one describing it as the Ministry for Promoting Virtue and Preventing Vice. It appears to be a revival of the one known for suppressing women's rights under Taliban rule 2 decades ago. The new sign at the building in central Kabul bears a verse from the Quran in a style similar to the Taliban flag. The group hasn't issued a statement about the change, but they have said they would restore the old Vice and Virtue Ministry. Staff who worked at the Women's Ministry haven't been allowed into the building and have protested this. The Taliban announced ministerial posts for its caretaker government earlier this month. They have not announced a head for the Women's Ministry. Under the previous government, it worked to expand women's rights. The Taliban say they will allow women to receive an education and work within the framework of Islamic law. But the recent moves are raising concerns that women's rights will be restricted again. The British government will ease restrictions on travel to England starting next month. Fully vaccinated visitors from low-risk countries will no longer need pre-departure tests or 10 days of quarantine after they arrive. The government will adopt a 2-tier system to categorize countries and territories into high or low risk based on their infection situations. The UK currently uses a 3-tier system. It will also expand the list of places from which it will accept vaccination certificates. Tough restrictions will remain for countries and territories seen as high risk. People who have been in these places in the preceding 10 days will be allowed into the UK only if they are British or Irish nationals or if they have residency rights. The red list includes countries such as Brazil and Indonesia. Airlines and tourism have been badly hit by the months of restrictions. Recent progress in vaccinations has prompted these industries to call for a review of the rules. After 18 months off due to the pandemic, the world-renowned New York Philharmonic Orchestra has returned to the stage. The artists were given a standing ovation as they took up their positions for a performance titled From Silence to Celebration, marking their comeback. The theater has strict anti-virus measures in place. Anyone who is unvaccinated is forbidden from entering. To get in, concertgoers have to show their smartphones with proof of vaccination.
It's so nice to finally be back and hear music live with great energy, and it was very touching.
New York City is gradually reopening with anti-virus measures in place. Broadway musicals resume performances on Tuesday. Ballet and opera theaters are also set to reopen. A famous festival in western Japan's Osaka prefecture is being held for the first time in 2 years, but people are being urged to stay away to prevent the coronavirus from spreading. The Danjiri Festival is held annually in Kishiwada City to pray for a good harvest. It started more than 300 years ago during the Edo period. The event was canceled last year due to the coronavirus pandemic. The festival is known for the Yari-mawashi exercise. The activity calls for participants to shout while pulling large carts. The wooden vehicles weigh more than 4 tons each. The organizers are holding the 2-day event without spectators this year just to carry on the tradition. The festival started on Saturday. City officials urged the organizers to take steps to prevent the spread of COVID-19 infections. The organizers responded by banning food stalls. They also set up screens along the streets to keep onlookers from gathering to watch the procession. Some people criticized the decision to hold the event amid the pandemic, but the organizers say the individuals hauling the carts have been vaccinated, and they say additional measures have been taken. They cite the implementation of a drinking ban along the streets as one example. Officials have posted a message on the city's website asking people not to go out and watch the event. Japanese weather officials say tropical storm Chanthu has turned into a low-pressure system, but they're urging people in the rain-soaked east of the country to stay on guard while the risk of floods and mudslides remains. Authorities in Mihama Town, Wakayama Prefecture say they've received dozens of reports of wind damage. Local weather officials say it is highly likely the area was hit by a tornado. Meteorological agency officials are forecasting localized thunderstorms in eastern Japan until Sunday morning. They say there's a continuing risk of mudslides, overflowing rivers, floods in low-lying areas, big swells along the coast, and powerful gusts. Those were the stories for this hour.